Jesus, Refugee, Renegade, Redeemer with Bear Grylls is brought to you by Mercy Ships.
mercyships.org. Be part of the adventure.
I'm Bear Grylls, and I've been to the highest point on the planet, and I'm now here at the Dead Sea, at the lowest point in the entire world. Get ready for the ultimate adventure. I'm in Israel, following the footsteps of a man who changed the entire world forever. The Refugee, the Renegade, and the Redeemer. Jesus of Nazareth.
Since leaping into the Holy Land, I've followed the starlit path that the Magi took to Bethlehem, waded into the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized, tried to walk on water on the Sea of Galilee, and I've even explored Jerusalem where Jesus healed the sick, flipped tables, and challenged the religious elite. And now I'm in the spot where Jesus spent the most agonizing night of his life.
This is the Garden of Gethsemane, just outside the city walls. And this is where Jesus came to the night before he gave himself up to the authorities. If, as he claimed, he was God down on earth as man, here to redeem and bring back all of humankind into love and freedom and connection with God, then arguably what was about to happen was the most important few days in the history of humankind. The sun is about to rise here, and I'm going to head into the city to find out what really happened in those final few days before Jesus' death. That time now that is celebrated all across the world as Easter. But at this time, it was the Jewish Passover, a time of high tension and celebration. But the world was about to change.
Today I'm retracing these final climatic moments in the life of Jesus. I'll follow the path where Jesus carried the cross, visit Golgotha, the site of his execution, and explore the depths of a cave just like the one where Jesus was buried. But first, I'll start at the spot where Jesus faced one of the biggest villains in the story, the Jewish high priest, Joseph ben Caiaphas.
Hey, Father Kelly.
Welcome there.
Nice to meet you.
Father Eamon Kelly is a renowned speaker, guide, and YouTuber here in Israel, and I love his passion for the Jesus story.
So this is where Jesus was dragged by those soldiers?
We remember this wonderful mystery here, this powerful mystery.
Yeah. Tell me about the mystery, come on.
At the start of the Passover, Jesus was welcomed into Jerusalem with crowds of cheering fans. And now he's been arrested by soldiers in the middle of the night, then dragged into trial before the high priest. But I have my own theory behind this sudden turn of events. When Jesus entered the city, he made a big scene at the temple. He toppled over the money tables and called the religious leaders robbers and thieves. Now, to be fair, these guys did seem pretty corrupt. I like to think of them as religious mafia, and their mob boss was High Priest Caiaphas. This guy was out for revenge. And here we are in the very spot where many believed this secret midnight trial took place.
Right now we're in Mount Zion. And Mount Zion was the elite part of the upper city, very close to the temple.
But why did they drag him to this house?
This is in the gospel account says Caiaphas was the high priest. And the high priest was the head dude.
So was this like the Jewish religious court?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Supreme Court, it's supreme power in the religious sphere. Prior to this moment, they were debating what do we need to do with this troublemaker from Galilee.
Why? What's he done wrong? All he's done is violating the Sabbath, you're saying?
In Jerusalem at this moment, there's a huge tension boiling. Why? Because Jesus already has been a couple of years in public life doing miracles. He has raised Lazarus from the dead a week before, and everybody in Jerusalem knew all about it. So these miracles become, they consolidate the popular understanding that Jesus is the Messiah.
Yeah.
Now, the Messiah in Jewish thinking would throw out the Romans. There would be a military victory.
Not for a second did they believe him. They didn't think he really was the Messiah. They were just trying to, they were just scared of this guy who's gaining popular momentum, raise somebody from the dead, and just wanted the problem to go away.
For their minds, Jesus is a troublemaker.
Yeah.
He's upsetting the status quo order.
Renegade.
Yeah, probably. They would probably consider him that way.
Why are they scared of this?
Because every Passover, the Romans brought in thousands of soldiers to Jerusalem. Why? Every year, once a year, at Passover, they gather to celebrate the liberation from slavery in Egypt.
Yeah.
And so it's a feast of liberation, a feast of freedom. And the last thing they have right now is freedom, because they're controlled by the Romans. So Caiaphas, let's say, had a good read of the situation politically. He didn't want an insurrection in Jerusalem that would provoke the Romans to come in and just massacre.
Yeah.
It's like explosive. It's the moment is ripe for trouble. He needs to eliminate Jesus.
Jesus was the ultimate threat to Caiaphas, to his peace with the Romans and his money-making machine at the temple. In the secret trial, Caiaphas and his cronies brought false witnesses to lie about Jesus. This wasn't about justice. It was more like an alleyway meeting with the mob. And through it all, Jesus remained utterly calm and silent, until Caiaphas asked him the big question.
Caiaphas comes straight out with it and he says, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the living God?" And Jesus says, "I am." Now, for you and me, I am Father Kelly, you are Bear, so what's the big deal? But actually, the word "I am" was never said. Why? Because it's the name of God.
What is the Jewish word for that?
Well, they use outside words for God. They say Hashem, the name. They won't say the word "I am," which is Yahweh.
Yeah.
So when Jesus was speaking and he said, "I am," where he's apparently making himself equal to God, and that's against the Jewish law.
Jesus is finally asked the only question that really matters. Are you the Messiah? Even today, his response would be controversial. For the Jewish people, "I am" is actually the name God gave himself. When Moses met God in the burning bush, God told Moses to call him "I am." Jesus has been called any number of names, still is, but here, in his own words, he clearly defines his true identity.
So that was like the final straw for them, is like...
Yes. They tear their garments, they spit at him. What more do we need? He is worthy of death.
The tide was turning against Jesus, and not even his closest friends stood up for him. Amazingly, Jesus had predicted this would happen. Peter couldn't believe it, but Jesus insisted, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And there, hiding in the darkness of Caiaphas' courtyard, that's exactly what happened. 3 times, people accused Peter of being one of Jesus' disciples, and 3 times, Peter denied even knowing him. At this moment, Peter comes face to face with Jesus, and Peter, overcome with guilt, runs away and weeps bitterly.
Jesus was let down by his closest, not because they didn't love him or trust him. It's just they were scared and they were human, and it's like, I'd probably have done the same, and thank goodness that we don't have to be brilliant to be friends of Jesus, I think is what I feel at the end of this.
The chief priests were determined to have Jesus killed, but only a Roman governor could authorize the execution. So Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate. For centuries, many wondered if this guy even existed. But just over 60 years ago, archaeologists discovered a 1st century stone a few miles from here. Known as the Pilate Stone, it bears the name of the Roman governor tasked with keeping peace in ancient Jerusalem. History remembers Pontius Pilate for his infamous dilemma: what to do with Jesus of Nazareth. Now I'm making my way to the historic location where Jesus faced the supreme Roman authority in Jerusalem.
Pilate had an impossible decision to make with Jesus.
Yeah, he did. And he wanted to get rid of Jesus without murdering him.
I'm back with my good friend, Andrew Ollerton, a theologian, pastor, and author. We're here at the Church of the Flagellation, where the Jesus story takes a very dark turn.
The place is packed. Pilate was quaking with the fear of Rome, you know, so he's thinking, how can I shut them up and send them away and give them what they want? So he does two things, really. He beats Jesus.
He wouldn't have done it, though, would he?
No, he had the soldiers do it. These guys were pros, right? They did this all the time, and they knew how to do it. They had these whips that would have had bits of metal and bone in it. I mean, this hasn't got all of the dangerous stuff on it, but you can imagine when you get a bit of pig bone and some metal on the end of this, and then the person is strapped down, so their back is exposed, they're taunt, powerless to defend themselves. Imagine the lashings with this, the bits digging in, you know, that's enough to properly destroy someone's flesh, rip them up, shred them.
What, so when Pilate brings Jesus back, what sort of state would he be in?
Well, there's an old prophecy in Isaiah, and I think of that one to answer your question. It says that he was marred beyond human likeness. It's like this is more of a piece of meat than a human now. It's like he's been so butchered, and it says people turned their faces away from him. It's like it's appalling.
Well, because all the flesh is ripped off you, bleeding. And I guess Pilate thought showing this broken Jesus would be enough.
But it wasn't enough, you know, for the Jewish leaders. Caiaphas, they weren't just gunning for blood, they wanted death. You know, they wanted him to be snuffed out completely. And so, you know, eventually Pilate realizes he's cornered and he washes his hands, which is his way really of, I think he's actually mocking one of their traditions, because in the Old Testament, you were to wash your hands if you were innocent of a murder. And he's basically saying, right, this is on your heads now. And they actually accept that. They say, yeah, all right, this is on us and our families. We'll take the blame for this. Crucify him.
Looking back 2,000 years, I can't wrap my mind around this moment. In just a few days, the same crowds who claimed Jesus as their king were now calling for his crucifixion. It just doesn't make sense. I think Pilate must have felt the same way. Even his wife had been plagued by dreams that Jesus was an innocent man. But in the end, Pilate let the mob decide for him. He offered them a choice. He could free Jesus or free a murderer called Barabbas. The people chose to free Barabbas. And to Jesus, they shouted, "Crucify him." So Pilate washed his hands of responsibility and surrendered Jesus to his brutal Roman guards.
He had been called King of the Jews, and they're like, all right, let's dress him up like a king, you know, play with that idea. So, you know, you've probably heard of the crown of thorns, you know, something maybe even chunkier than this was pressed down onto the skull of Jesus as a sort of mock crown. So they put that on his head, and then they put a robe on him. So they're teasing him, they're mocking him, and it's because from here, Jesus then was taken to crucifixion.
So how does the crucifixion work? How do they take him there?
Yeah, so I mean, imagine this. They've whipped you, flogged you, you're wrecked as a body, mocked as a person, and then there's this huge wooden beam that you have to carry, right? And
the crossbeam?
The crossbeam, yeah. So they make him carry it, part of the punishment. Yeah, and this is in the heat of the day, and it's probably about 800 meters to where he's actually crucified.
That's a long way.
This beam alone may have weighed about 150 pounds, 70 kg.
Yeah, well, that's heavy.
Well, it is, and I know you work out, but we've got, you know, an opportunity just to see if you can lift it. That is about, we think that weight is about the same as the crossbeam that Jesus would have had to carry on 800 meters after getting flogged.
Really?
Yeah, come on.
Wow.
Yeah. That on you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
800 meters, you know? And you're in good shape. You've not been flogged.
We've drunk water, we're well fed.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the state that Jesus, the amount of blood he's lost. I'm not man enough to be able to, I'm no Jesus to be able to carry that 800 meters, but let's walk it.
The Via Dolorosa.
Yeah,
Okay, let's do it.
Jesus was a dead man walking. His path to crucifixion is called the Via Dolorosa, which means the way of suffering. Along this winding road are 14 stations, each representing a key moment in Jesus' journey to death. From the trial before Pilate all the way to Golgotha, the site of the horrific crucifixion, death, and burial of Jesus. Being here, walking on the very same path where Jesus carried his cross, it feels heavy and sacred.
At the time of Jesus, this was just the top of the hill.
This was a
Is
rock.
this Golgotha?
This is Golgotha, yeah.
Which means what?
Well, it means the place of the skull. So down beneath what we're going to go into now, there are tombs where they buried people. But above it, there was a prominent place overlooking, and this is one of the main routes into Jerusalem, so this is perfect for the Romans, you know, prominent place, loads of traffic. This is the place to nail him publicly as an enemy of Rome, and this is what happens.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was established in 335 AD, nearly 1700 years ago. And every year, over 1 million people come to visit. Across Jerusalem, you can easily spot the church with its blue sky domes. The smaller dome covers the traditional site, Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of a stone quarry, which fits the description of the earliest Christian writings about this spot. Beneath the larger dome, you'll find a shrine that houses a stone-cut tomb dating back to the 1st century. This is believed to be the actual tomb of Jesus.
So this is beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Wow, this is a holy site, like the holiest of sites. I mean, it's pretty certain this is where Jesus was crucified.
And obviously at the time this, they've built a church over it now, but at the time this was just top of the hill, outside the city wall, bare rock, beating sun.
We're kind of standing on the spot where Jesus is then spread out, so he's pinned down to that wooden crossbeam, not nails through the hands, actually. The nails would have gone through the wrists, right? They didn't want it tearing away. So they smashed nails through the wrists, and then they lifted that up. So this high above the crowd, there's this prominent execution.
It's hard to imagine just how horrific this scene would have been. Jesus lifted above the crowds, his feet nailed to the cross. The sign above his head declares him King of the Jews. Now only a few brave followers remain, including his mother, who can only watch as her son suffers excruciating pain. A handful of Roman soldiers cast lots for Jesus' clothes. Jewish religious leaders and passers-by hurl insults at the failed Messiah. These are the eyewitnesses to the death of Jesus Christ, and his final dying moments are some of the most pivotal in human history.
The cross is a symbol of like hope and love and peace and unity, but actually it's this instrument of torture.
Amazing, isn't it? We're so removed from what actually happened here. We don't see public executions. And the Romans were brutal. They wanted this suffering to last. Because one of the ways people died from crucifixion was asphyxiation. They slumped down and their lungs collapsed and they couldn't breathe. So the Romans sometimes even fitted a little seat so that the person couldn't drop their body down and die. They were literally stopping them and hanging them there to make them suffer.
And who else was crucified there?
Well, either side of Jesus were two other people being crucified. They were robbers, possibly violent insurrectionists, sort of terrorists, you might say, but certainly violent criminals. One of them, he must have seen something different in Jesus. He starts to reach out to him, and he actually says, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus says, I think is the most incredible thing, he says, today you will be with me in paradise. And this is a brutal, violent man. It's like he's promising him paradise. Extraordinary.
I kind of relate to that of like, you don't have to be super spiritual. All he did was, in desperation, look at Jesus, say, remember me.
Yeah.
Don't be with me, don't forget me.
Yeah.
And it's like, done.
Just reach out.
Reach out.
Just reach out. You know, the other thing he says from the cross is he speaks out over the crowd that's hammering him with taunts. And Jesus says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, if ever someone practiced what they're preaching, he said, love your enemies earlier in his teaching, and now he's doing it.
And what? And then he's up there, and how long would he have been up there?
Yeah, no, Jesus, it was 6 hours. So from 9 o'clock in the morning, and then at midday, at 12, after 3 hours, this unnatural darkness descends on the land. It's kind of spooky, really, but it gives the Bible gives the sense that as this happens, all of the darkness of evil is falling onto Jesus at this moment. It's like he's taking on himself all this evil. And it's in that he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?
So why is he saying that? Why is he shut away from God?
This is what he said, isn't it? That he's going to take on himself the sins of the world. And I think that's the darkness. 3 hours of that.
And is it actually documented that the sky went black in the middle of the day?
Yeah, and that is cross-referenced in other accounts. Not only that, but as he died, you know, there was an earthquake, rocks were split. You know, some of these things.
And you would be really, if you were like a soldier, you'd be going, what is going on?
Well, the Roman centurion, who at the very end, when he hears some of the things Jesus says from the cross, it's the Roman centurion who says, surely this man was the Son of God. You know, he arrives at an extraordinary conclusion, because this is an extraordinary death.
So it goes through all of this horrific torture, crucifixion, thieves either side of him, has that connection with the thief, but then eventually
he reaches his end. Yeah, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he dies. But before he does, he says, I thirst. And suddenly you realise, oh yeah, he's thirsty. He's got all that visceral kind of pain of thirst. But then they lift up a drink to him, and it's only when he's had that drink, almost as if that drink is him saying, I'm drinking that final cup, you know, that final Passover cup that he never drank with his disciples. Now he's having that drink as if to say, this is the end.
Yeah, because they'd have 4 cups of wine.
Yeah.
But they only had 3 cups at the
It was
dinner.
the 3rd cup he took, the cup of thanksgiving, and then they left. It says after that, abruptly, they left, awkwardly. The disciples confused, you know, they hadn't finished the meal. But I think Jesus said, I thirst, took the cup, and because then he says these words, he says, it is finished. And notice he doesn't say, I'm finished. It's not some resignation of defeat. It's this announcement of some kind of strange victory or completion. And that's what Passover should have finished with. As if Jesus is saying, now the real Passover, now the real salvation is done. I've done it. It's finished. The work is complete.
Job done.
Yeah, job done.
It is finished. Jesus' dying words mark the completion of his mission. At the Last Supper, Jesus compared himself to the Passover sacrifice. Like the lamb, his body would be broken, his blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins. And now at that same moment, roughly 3 p.m., the high priest is sacrificing the Passover lamb in the temple. Jesus wasn't the Messiah anyone expected. His mission granted people freedom not from empires and governments, but from the forces that imprison us from within. By now, the people had known Jesus as a refugee fleeing his homeland. They'd known him as a renegade who defied religious and political powers. But in his death, he becomes something else entirely. Redeemer.
God, it's amazing. Just being able to feel the ground that this all happened on.
Yeah. You know, this is a site of brutal torture and execution. Yeah, it absolutely is. But Jesus transformed it into a site of beautiful hope and redemption as well. You know, he is the Redeemer. And so this guy, the thief on the cross next to him, the Roman centurion, these people are finding hope right out of his death. It's such a beautiful summary of what he really came to do. Somehow through this death, the mysterious work of God is somehow through this death, hope is coming to the world.
You know, it's that thing of I could never believe in a God that hadn't suffered, hadn't experienced what so many people, horrors that people go through. But this is such an image, isn't it, of like suffering and pain and isolation and rejection and brokenness and separation.
One of the prophecies says that surely he has taken up our pain and borne our sorrows. You know, he's kind of made our pain and our sorrows his own. And so the cross is simultaneously bloody execution and beautiful hope.
I can't imagine Jesus' friends saw this moment as hopeful. Jesus is dead, their mission over. He was most likely buried a short distance from here. Today that site is covered by a shrine and surrounded by seekers. So once again, I'm heading out of the city. I want to know what that dark, terrible moment was really like, when Jesus' body was finally sealed inside that stony, pitch-black tomb. I'm back with my friend Christine Kane, this time in an empty cave. Jesus would have been buried in a place just like this.
Yeah, it's funny, I've spent so much of my time, you know, on adventure surviving, often in caves, and there's such a feel, isn't there? Once you go in, you can't hear the outside world, it's cool, you know, but also, I suppose, for indigenous cultures, it was always also a place of death.
Yes, oh, very much so. And I mean, it was a cave just like this that Jesus was placed in after he was crucified on the cross. I mean, I think particularly though in Jesus' time, this was where you buried upper wealthy people. So that's quite wild because Jesus was crucified as a criminal.
So how did that work out? Because he certainly wasn't a wealthy man. He lived as like a poor man.
Definitely. Well, this guy, his name is Joseph of Arimathea. He basically was part of the religious group and he knew what happened to Jesus was not fair. And the trial wasn't just, the execution wasn't just. And so he jumps in and offers his own cave, his own tomb. And that's a really big deal.
I find it interesting that the man who provided the burial cave for Jesus was actually a Pharisee. He was like a part of the elite, because sometimes you get the impression that, you know, Jesus was always down on the religious elite and the Pharisees. And I know he did a lot of like saying, you hypocrites and this, and you're blinding people from truth. But there must have been a few good people amongst them who kind of felt it as well.
And Nicodemus, who also was a religious man, was part of that. And they were like, they understood that this man must have been the Son of God. There was something different about him.
And then suddenly here he is now burying the dead, beaten, broken body of Jesus.
And then organises the whole burial process as well, because it's quite an elaborate burial process. You've got to wrap them up in linen, wash the body. But the deal is he was put in a cave like this with a stone put on the front of it that was at least 2 tons. And so this thing was sealed.
So what, they would have laid the body of Jesus in this cool tomb, sealed that entrance with a 2-ton rock?
2 ton at least. They made sure that they had guards and that stone was rolled very securely in front of the tomb. Obviously, the religious people and the officials didn't want anyone to try to take Jesus out of the cave. They wanted everyone to know, oh, he is dead.
I know the Christian church calls it Good Friday, but to be honest, at this stage, it's looking more like Bad Friday. I mean, he's dead, he's buried, sealed, done.
Done, because you think, to get here, Judas had betrayed him, Peter had denied him, he'd gone through the crucifixion, none of the other disciples were around, so you would have thought, naturally speaking, that this sect, this religious group was finished. Imagine what everyone's feeling at this point. We thought he might have been the Messiah. We thought he might have overturned the Roman Empire. We thought he was our hope. And now he's dead, buried in a cave.
So then what happens?
And there's, in particular, 2 women, and they're the 2 Marys. And they couldn't wait for the Sabbath to be over because, of course, you can't go and anoint a body on a Sabbath because that's just not done. And so at the first light of Sunday, first chance they get, they turn up and they're coming to this tomb.
So they're going to move the stone again and go in.
On the way, they're having the conversation with themselves going, who's going to move the stone? And this is where the story gets really wild, because they turn up the stone. That 2-ton stone has been moved, so the doorway is open. There is an angel sitting on top of the stone, bright, his clothes shining bright light, and he's asking them, why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? And the women are absolutely freaking out.
Well, where we are in this cave, down the end, is a place of death.
Uh-huh.
Should we go to the cave entrance?
Let's go.
Come on then. There's something powerful about actually going inside this sort of place. It really is a place of death. It's cold, it's dark, it's where bodies were left sealed to decompose. And in any other story, this is where stories end. But for me, what is so intriguing, so powerful about this journey is that on this rare occasion, the tomb is actually just the beginning. So what, they turn up here and the stone is just gone?
They're gone, and there's an angel sitting on it. I mean, you've got to understand how supernatural this is. The guards are terrified because they know they're going to lose their life.
Why would they lose their lives?
If those guards had let Jesus somehow get out, you're dead. There is no plan B, because they were placed there to make sure that that stone stayed there and that Jesus was in there for this very reason, so that when people started coming around going, see, he was the king, he was the Messiah, he defeated death, they could say, no, he's dead in that tomb. But not only is he not dead, you got to laugh. He even folded, man, his grave clothes and folded them and left them in there and said, peace out.
But do you not think he could have been half dead on the cross, and then buried, rested, moved the rock out of the way, folded his clothes and gone? I mean, just being a cynic, well, why not?
Well, you know, it takes a heck of a lot more faith to believe that Jesus wasn't dead. I mean, we are talking Roman execution, crucifixion. I mean, the most barbaric form of execution ever in the history of humanity. I mean, after they put the crown of thorn, they nailed and hammered his hands and feet to a cross. Then they stuck a spear in his side, blood and waters coming out. On top of that, the Sabbath was coming. So they were going along breaking everyone's legs to make sure they were dead, because you can't have a criminal hanging on a cross during the Sabbath. Well, when they got to Jesus, he was already dead, to the point that he was the only one. They didn't even need to break his legs. That's how dead he was. He was dead, not pretend dead. They then take him, they put him in this tomb, they roll that stone, they put guards around it because they're like, this guy's not getting out. There was no room for error. There is not a possibility that Jesus wasn't dead.
It's funny, little details like that. That was always convincing for me.
There was no one that was going to be able to bust Jesus out. Only Jesus could bust Jesus out.
To me, it speaks of perfect, meticulous, beautiful, preordained, planning, signed, sealed, delivered.
Well, you know, you've nailed it. That's exactly what it is.
I find it interesting that you say the first people that discovered this were two women.
This is a big deal because, you know, back in those times, a woman's testimony was never received in court. I mean, she had no rights.
Really?
Totally, yeah, you couldn't have done it. So here we have the resurrection of Jesus. This is what the whole Christian faith is based on. And he entrusts it to the testimony of women. I mean, this is wild. He totally empowered and dignified women.
In a way, for me, that feels authentic, because it's like it's not what you'd plan if you were trying to hoax it.
Well, that's what I think, because it turns everything on its head. Because you think, I wouldn't do that, but he did that. And then, you know, he's there when the women see him, so they see him for themselves. And again, this is
what do you mean they see him? How?
Well, they thought he was a gardener. So here the women suddenly spot who they think is a gardener. Then he calls them, this is Jesus's first word, you know, he calls her by her name. His first word, the resurrected Jesus, is woman, and then he's like Mary. As soon as she hears her name, with his voice, she knows that this thing's real.
And then what happens?
Well, then she's like, goes to try to grab him, and he's like, no, not yet, but go and tell the disciples that I'm risen from the dead. I am who I said I am. So off the women go to tell everyone.
And do they believe the two women?
Well, you know, not everyone does, but like Thomas is like, I don't believe this. I need to see him. I need to touch his hands and his feet.
So then now what's Jesus reacted to?
You know, the amazing thing is that Jesus then appears to Thomas and he goes, okay, so you want to see that I'm real? Well, here it is.
And who else did he then appear to?
Well, to the disciples, to Peter, to 500 other people.
500?
Over 500.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. And where does all this then eventually lead the disciples and Jesus?
Well, for that, I think you're going to have to go to Galilee.
Back to Galilee.
I'm headed back to the place where Jesus' ministry began, the shores of Galilee. This is where Jesus called out to his first disciples to leave their fishing boats and join his renegade mission. And now his friends are back, fishing again.
Look at that for a background.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Last time I met Yoel, we talked about the stories that Jesus told in Galilee. And now I'm here to explore Jesus' last great appearance in this region.
Super cool, look at this.
Well, I thought that a proper Galilean breakfast would be suitable. Some special grilled fish and bread.
Yeah, so good.
And more than that, the food of joy.
Yeah,
Yeah?
Come on. It's never too early for a glass of wine,
Well,
is it?
absolutely, especially in Israel.
Why was this breakfast so special?
Well, we read up in the Gospels of a fish and bread breakfast that Jesus makes for his disciples. But we have to remember the setting that is going on here before that happens. After the crucifixion of Jesus, they come back here and they go back to being fishermen.
What do you think they were thinking at this stage?
It must have been confusing. It's like there's a tremendous disconnect. The adventure of the past 3 years and the trauma of the crucifixion, and then the drama of he's reappearing to them.
Yeah.
And then they're back and fishing on this lake again. There's a real disconnect between there.
Because they were obviously doubting, you know?
They're back on the boat.
They were back on the boat, and I like that because I have loads of doubts. I really do. I'm like such a skeptic often, you know, and really struggle with so many things. And it's like I need reminding every day.
And just imagine what it is to fish in this context. Throughout the night, you throw your net into the water. You're going to be diving in to retrieve it, and doing that again and again into the morning. And have nothing afterwards. It's that complete emptiness. Does that reflect something of the emptiness of the past 3 years? All of that, and there's nothing? And then there's a man standing on the shore, and he calls out to them, have you caught anything?
Yeah.
And they're like, no. And so, well, throw your net off to the other side of the boat. Screw you, what are you doing? What are you telling me to do this again?
Yeah.
Where were you all night? You've been sleeping, we've been working, and you tell me to throw it again? It says that they did that. They threw the net back into the water, and then they had this amazing catch. 153 fish.
Yeah.
They catch everything, big fish, all at once.
Do you think they recognized them, or what happened?
So it's at that moment when they catch the fish, this tremendous catch. Peter, he gets so excited, and he jumps into the water. He leaves behind his friends, he leaves behind the other students, and the fish, the big catch is all left behind, and he just swims back. So this is where they recognize who it was who gave them that instruction, but they didn't know when he told them, throw your nets back in. They didn't know, it was just some guy.
This meal would have been special, you know, because
Absolutely.
now there's like, he's here.
Yeah.
And these guys knew him so well. It's not like, is it him?
Peter is the one who's rushing. He has this personal need to come face to face.
Yeah, because the last interaction he had was denying it.
Exactly, exactly. At the critical moment of need, Jesus is in this illegal midnight trial.
Yeah.
Peter is there, he's denying, I have nothing to do with that man.
Yeah.
There's nobody to stand up and say that what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
And Peter was the one to do that, and he denies him 3 times in Jerusalem.
So what does Jesus say? Does he say anything to Peter now?
Right. So now in this meal, he recreates that moment, and he asks, "Do you love me?" Out of all things, yes, Lord. Of course I love you. I surely love you. And he repeats this 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter, he gets offended.
Yeah.
Of course, I keep telling you yes. And Jesus' response is what's so instructive. You say you love me. Take care of my sheep, my flock. I need you to feed them, to take care of them.
So who are the sheep?
It's everybody. It's beyond the divisions of Jewish, Greek, Roman of those time in the 1st century, or today, Jewish, Arab, Greek, whoever we may be. It starts in Jerusalem, it starts with the Jewish people, but then expands outward to everybody. And that is the call that God started from in the very beginning.
So I guess what makes this breakfast as amazing is that you're turning that moment out there of fishing and despair and empty nets and empty hearts and grief into a moment of like together, feeding, knowing the Almighty quietly and here, and then loving each other.
What's the most important out of all of God's commandments? Love the Lord your God with your whole being. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Peter is given that opportunity to correct his wrong, to be restored. Yes, you say you love me. Show me by what you do to them, to my people, whom I care about.
Loving each other, that I like.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I'll drink to that.
L'chaim.
Come on, let's break some of this bread.
Thank you.
When I look back at this journey, it seems so clear. Every miracle, every table turned, every wound suffered. Everything Jesus did was an act of love. Even his coming to earth. One of Jesus' closest friends, John, famously said that God so loved the world, he sent Jesus, his only son.
I've realized the message of Jesus is all about love. It always was, and it always will be. And his life was never going to be the end. It's really the beginning.
The Jesus story reaches its epic high point near this spot at the Mount of Olives. In a final show of divinity, Jesus ascends into the heavens while his friends and followers watch. That's where he commissions them with an all-new mission. Go into all the world to tell his story, a story of bold humility and radical love, where blind eyes see, the lame walk, and the dead rise again. He called this the good news, and to me, that's exactly what this is. Jesus' friends would take this news beyond Jerusalem, to Turkey, Greece, Rome, and the Far East, across oceans and across centuries. Now they were the refugees, hunted down by religious and political enemies. They were renegades, upending the world's most oppressive powers. They followed the path of Jesus, the great Redeemer, most of them giving their very lives. It's a story that continues to this very day. But I'll save that for another adventure.